And what we were talking about right now is just the governor's budget, just his version, right? Fortunately, there's checks and balances in the legislature, and advocates play a critical role. Community organizations play a critical role in that process. But now there's this brand new legislature that just got sworn in December, and we have roughly about over 33 new members in the legislature. Some who have never held office, some who have held local office before, and so forth. And so, what do you think is going to happen with the governor, with the legislature? And I'll just start off by saying, given it's my issue area, so advocates in the immigrant rights space was saying, yes, thank you for the continuing investment for $75 million for the immigration legal services, but we also need more because of the incoming administration. And so the Senate has kind of heard the calls from advocates, and they're proposing $25 million to ensure that immigrant Californians are able to be protected when it comes to wage theft, for deportation, defense, and detention, representation and detention. What are some of your thoughts about the new legislature?
So for me, I think in terms of the budget, the governor has an upper hand, right, in negotiation, because he's negotiated a number of budgets across a number of years. So that's a plus on him, for him to be able to have that experience. And in many ways, this new class may need to figure where they want to push back or not push back. In terms of their own priorities. I think on the Senate side, you have an experienced pro tem, right, who's negotiated budgets or helped negotiate budgets in the past. So the Senate has that. The Assembly, has the larger majority of these members. So I think figuring out, Speaker Rivas is going to have, his work cut out to figure out what all the his caucus's priorities are, and how he's going to cobble all that stuff together. That again, if there's a theme for me, it's a lot of question marks to certain things.
Hey, the Juan over here, Mr. Riddler over here. Come in a green suit next time.
But I think it's going to be that. It's for the speaker in the assembly. I think that's a question mark waiting to be seen, what they prioritize, and how Speaker Rivas decides to, move that caucus forward.
I don't know that I'd want to be a legislator right now, coming in brand new. You got to fight. So, Southern California, has gone through this huge emergency. We're going through it right now. A bunch of members have gone down, and so I think you're trying to deal with that, tackle that budget conversation. You were just talking about the dollars that go towards that, and you're also trying to figure out, how do I deliver for not just California, but for my district. We know that the budget is status quo right now, but they always say well, don't come asking us for more. But you still have to produce. You're a new member, right? You want to, what can I bring home to my district? I want to put those parks in there. I want to open up this clinic or get a program for a school. And I think that's going to be tough in this first year, is all our different priorities, and how do we actually balance all of that. And I think we're probably, I can say from our perspective, starting to feel that as advocates, where everybody's getting a little bit cautious about okay, we're taking the meetings, having the conversations about bills for next year, but what's actually going to be introduced and where are people going to land.
And it's really interesting to see who's being real bold and who's not gonna, who's introducing legislation that is this is gonna pass, it's gonna take some time, but this is a priority for them. But it's not as bold and as big as other pieces of legislation for freshman members, and so that's always cool. That's always cool to watch. I think when I worked in the legislature, I only worked for new members, so it's also that time to get to know who they are as a state rep, because they might have this profile as city council or school board member, and those are all their priorities, but there's just a plethora more of priorities and pieces of policy that they're going to have to vote on one way or another.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Rita, there's a big vacuum in like champions in particular issue areas, right? You saw over the last 5 years, members who, I'll speak for the environment. Like we knew who our champions were.
Yeah.
Like we knew how they were going to do us a solid and introduce certain bills or vote a certain way. Like we had a lot of that stuff locked in, and this is I think not just for the environment, just across the board for every sector. There is a vacuum in that, and there is going to be a lot of jockeying and not enough issues potentially for those members to be champions of that, to be the leader of that, right? And so that shuffling is going to be interesting to see who takes up certain mantles and is going to be known as the climate legislator or the health or like particular programs, particular issues. So that's a whole new revamping that's happening.
That's such a good point. What is I'm not a sports person, but like the rebuilding year that we're going through, and not just with members, but with staff too. Like shout out to the staff who hold it down.
Shout out to staff.
Shout out to staff. Wherever the camera is. Shout out to staff who hold it down for your bosses and your offices. But at the end of the day, like the members do come and go, right? We have their term limits. It's that is what it is. But I feel like in addition to needing to educate a lot of new members and start from scratch on like the history of where we've been and what's been introduced and why it did or didn't work and all of that. I feel it a little bit on the staff side too. Like a lot of folks who, I worked with, or I'm like, oh, I didn't realize like you don't work in the Capitol anymore, or it's like a new generation, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm all about that. Love to see it. But it's also that institutional knowledge where we have to work as advocates to bring not just the member, but the staff who's doing the legwork into the fold and really build, in some cases I'm thinking about it as like, how are we building the next generation of advocates? Because so many Capitol staff end up leaving the Capitol eventually and coming into the advocacy space. So it's an opportunity for us to like build out that expertise in people.
Yeah, totally. It's and we have to remember that this legislature that's in now is what we're going to be seeing for the next 12 years, right? This is the next decade of legislation and budgets and things like that and priorities. This is the class for the most part. And so having that early education, not just with members, but with staff who are oftentimes are really brand new, have not been part of this process, is just as important as almost anything else that we're doing because oh man.
And it's part of our learning curve, right? Trying to
Yeah.
figure that out. And then once we think we kind of get it, it's going to be like another shuffle, right? I feel like I was barely learning like this last wave of class, the new class, right? And now here we have another 30 or so, right?
I don't recognize some of the members that if I see them across, unless I
That's the
want.
next half. That's the next half of the podcast. We're
I
going to do a
recognize
quiz.
all of them. Juan.
Yeah, all of them.
I'm not walking the halls with you.
And I will tell them that the same thing. Like,
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Juan, they're the most important people. Wow.
Their jokes are so funny too.
Well,
I like how you laughed harder too.
I think for advocates, it's like we also have to reset because in the conversations other advocates are having, or that I'm in the spaces with, they'll be like, do you know that they don't want to do this or they only want to do this? And I was like, yeah, they haven't been here for the last 12 years and you're still thinking of the last class. I was like, you got to meet them where they're at. They're not as bold just yet. And I think that's going to be an interesting factor when it comes to legislation and policy and the budget.
Yeah. But then in 2 years, we're getting another governor,
Yeah.
and then
Layering
that's
on top of that.
that's the other learning curve. Yeah.
Like last year's legislature fought Newsom on the deficit, right? They said, that's nice, but there's certain programs we want. well, let's see how much pushback this new legislature gets.
Because a lot of them were OGs that like led in that fight, and then they're gone, right? Because they're like, what do we have to lose?
Yeah, I wonder who's gonna step up, and really be like, I'm here and I'm gonna make like my claim, right?
So what are other things that advocates are saying about this year? What are you all going to be working on? What are other advocates going to be working on as we talk about, so the process is that the legislator, the senators and the assembly members, they actually got told this year to limit the bill amount that they introduced.
I love
15
that.
bills?
I think that's where they landed.
I don't know. I'm getting all mine introduced, so I don't know how many what the bill limit is.
No, I love that for us.
But,
We don't have limits.
yeah, they do. But so what's going on out there? What are your fellow advocates telling you? What are you hearing from community organizations? What are they going to be proposing this year?
Well, I'm hearing it's harder to get commitments on things, just in general. That's word on the street right now. So, TBD to this point about like what gets introduced, what people want to prioritize. But in terms of priorities, so let me also just say LCHC, for short, Latino Coalition for Healthy California. We're a little over 30 years old, and we are an organization that's really, our North Star is that Latino-Latine health equity, right? We want to make sure that when we talk about healthy communities, that there are no barriers to Latine communities accessing services, accessing general health care, that we can thrive and have, good health outcomes just like everybody else. So that's the work that we do and that we're focused on. But in terms of our priorities for this year, they're kind of aligned with what I was talking about in the budget. So making sure that we're grounded in that commitment to Medi-Cal. But kind of on the flip side of it and on the ground, I think this is what I was saying, is like really wanting to make sure the program is strong. Because if something happens to threaten the funding, I want to see, me personally, I want to see our Medi-Cal roles be filled, be strong, because it's harder to try to take away a program that so many people depend on and utilize, right? That's a strong message, just a powerful image of like who would actually be impacted. And so if you're eligible and you still need to sign up, you should sign up. Hence the investment in our promotoras to help us get the word out, because they're there on the ground in communities and can help people understand the benefit and lead them to clinics, health navigators who are actually able to help them sign up for the benefit. So part of our work is going to be looking really at know your rights from a healthcare perspective. Understand what you have access to today. If you're a DACA recipient, regardless of what's happening right now with the expansion of the ACA for DACA recipients and the lawsuit, in California, you can still access those benefits through the ACA because of just, we weren't part of that lawsuit as the 19 states that challenged access for deferred action folks to have access to the Affordable Care Act exchange. And so, that is something I don't know if everybody knows. So Medi-Cal, right? DACA recipients have access to the health exchange in California. Let's get that out there. Let's also talk about the fact that, at least as of today, as of the taping of this podcast, there are limits to where ICE and CBP can be. They aren't allowed to go into hospitals or clinics and pull people out from their beds and care. Same with schools and with courthouses, and making sure people understand that today. Public charge was something that we saw happen under the first Trump administration, and that was a policy change at the federal level that basically put the target on the back of anybody who was using a public benefit. And if you were using these specific lists of public benefits, there was the possibility that that could keep you from adjusting your status if you were undocumented trying to get a green card holder to becoming a citizen, right? And so we're saying, as of right now, that does not exist. I'm sure the Trump administration is going to want to bring that back. But people need to have this information so that they can decide for themselves and their families, what course of action they want to take. They need to have the full information to be able to decide, how they want to invest in their health or not. And so our organization is working to try to put that information out, like I said, using the promotoras to get the word out. We're also pushing on the federal flexibilities. We love that it went through June of 2025. So that goes back to that just ease and being able to continue your Medi-Cal coverage without having that administrative interruption. But ideally, we would love to see that just all year, all the time. Like, what is it that keeps California or any state, like, why do we have to have these administrative hoops and barriers? It does cost money, but you get people who have a guaranteed access. If they're on a benefit, they won't lose a benefit. And so we're going to keep an eye out on that and figure out, is that a bill? Is that a budget play? I think, for people who are listening to this too, the priorities are always that question of like, is it a bill? Is it a budget ask? Is it both? So we're also really prioritizing, hands down, all things CHWPR and promotoras, which is community health worker promotoras. And when I say all things, I talked a little bit earlier about in the budget, making sure they get fair wages, so that rate increase that we actually had in the last budget, but politically was taken away through a proposition, through Prop 35. And so really trying to reclaim that. But the other thing that we actually are going to be looking at legislation for is that under Medi-Cal, actually you can use a promotora, and clinics and things can bill for the use of promotoras, but there's not a lot of transparency about how often promotoras are utilized under Medi-Cal. When they're summoned, what they're tasked to do, what is the profile of who that promotora is in terms of where they're located in the state. And so we're going to be working to try to get some clarity with like an annual report that really shows, like, are we using the benefit? Are we underusing it? Because we know it's needed, and so we're just trying to pull that data. LCHC has done a lot of data work. We just had a bill this past year to actually bring in data to disrupt the word Latino, Latine, to include indigenous individuals, because not everybody identifies as Latine. So this is that second step in the data work that we've been doing: data transparency, data justice, all of those things.
So, Juan, the governor is at the forefront often with the environment. What are some of the things that the advocates are talking about this year?
It's implementation, right? Implementation of the bond Prop 4 and how that's going to get rolled out. Part of the bond had explicit language of 40% of the funding to be used in areas and communities that had been mostly disadvantaged and disinvested on for a number of years. So making sure that we build equity into that. But the question is, how is that going to be implemented, right? So that's going to be a component of that. The other component is the outside of the bond is extreme heat funding. One of the things that we didn't see in the bond it was a significant investment in extreme heat. And so certainly for our organization and also many other environmental justice organizations that we're working with, we're going to be looking at in advancing how do we get extreme heat funding into the budget, because fire is going to be ongoing. But then we have extreme heat, right? Events. Extreme heat is probably one of the deadliest climate events that happens that kills more people than almost any other natural disaster. It's a silent killer, and so we need to continue to invest in some of those things like resiliency centers, right? And for us, helping to build green schoolyards and looking at revamping and throwing out the old school model of having asphalt playgrounds and tearing up that asphalt and putting more trees, creating more canopy, creating more green space in those playgrounds. And then the other one is cap and trade, right? The cap and trade investment. One reauthorization is going to, that's something that is starting to be discussed a lot more. But then the actual investments, that's going to be another component of a big fight that we're going to be seeing, and how those monies are allocated. Because one of the things that we're seeing over the last several years is that there's a lot of reverting back from general fund dollars that were allocated to the surplus and backfilled with the greenhouse reduction fund, and so we're seeing more of that. And so the question is, what is that new investment plan going to fund in this coming year? And right now, how it's planned right now, it's still the same as last year. And so, what are the new things that are invested, or the same things that are invested in? So we're going to be having that discussion in the legislature as well. So those are some of the big priorities, and then just looking at keeping an eye on what is the funding for fire response and recovery, and how does that community rebuild again?
And Carol, so education, we know that there's a lot more to it than just what's in the governor's budget, what advocates are going to be advocating for in the budget. So what's going to be on the forefront of policy this year in 2025 for education?
Yeah. I feel like when Rita talked about, what's going to happen also at the federal level and how that impacts health, I think that's something that we're seeing right now with students applying for financial aid, right? There's a lot of students who are choosing not to apply for financial aid, and that's limiting their ability to get Pell Grants, which in turn would financially support their college pathway. And so I think this year that's going to be a big priority for a lot of advocates, simply because, we don't want to encourage students to do something that could potentially, be used for their parents' status. We also don't know how far back the administration could use that information, but at the same time, we don't want to keep our students from, pursuing their higher education, which would essentially help them grow into the workforce, get them better paying jobs, get them into position or places that we get to be a part of, right? Simply because, you take that step. And so I think that's going to be really important to folks to see, how that plays out. At the state level, I think sometimes it's hard to figure out what makes the most sense based on, where a student is. But I know for my clients and the folks that I get to work with, we're really prioritizing student pathways. So dual enrollment programs, it's part of the governor's master plan on education. So, we're really trying to tie things together, make it pretty and make it accessible so that more students can essentially take community college classes while they are in high school, and essentially, reducing that burden of debt when they do transfer. The governor has a goal for students to essentially have at least 12 units before they, go off to college. But I think what we're trying to figure out as advocates, how do we set it up so that there's a foundation set in stone so it actually happens, right? I think there's a plethora of other things we could talk about, folks working on, but I think it's really just thinking about it through an equity lens and seeing how, whatever it is that we're advocating actually ensures that the students who need it most are being centered in the policies that we support and propose. Yeah.
I forgot.
No, go for it.
I can already hear. You didn't talk about this? One thing I want to say that Carol brought up that I think is super important, and I want to underscore, I think a lot of advocates are looking at this right now, is data protection, privacy protection. I talked about this effort to try to get people to make sure they're enrolled in Medi-Cal. I also don't want to discount the fear that exists with people because of public charge and all of the things, but when you enroll in things like that, you're putting you have to, right, in order to be assessed for eligibility. And so we want to have a lot of conversations, continue to have. We got to meet with Secretary Johnson at the end of last year. And, luckily she's like, I have lived through a Trump administration as a state leader and knows the value of like privacy. And so I think that just connects back to like the dollars that the AG, that the Attorney General is asking for in the budget, that I know there's a lot of conversation about like what do we prioritize right now in terms of urgency, but I don't think we can lose sight of making sure that we have the ability to protect people's information and that we can share as advocates, here's how it's protected. It's not as easy as the federal government opening a file cabinet or clicking a button on a computer, that there are firewalls that legally can be challenged, but it's not like there's nothing. And so I think that's a part of our work, and especially in the medical space, to understand where those barriers are. And then the final thing, an uplifting thing that we're going to be working on starting this year, but for the next several years, LCHC is going to be really the home for this campaign to increase the number of Latino physicians in California. So we talk about medical all the time, but when it comes down to people, getting appointments, myself included, right? Like sometimes it's so hard to get appointments, but getting an appointment and getting in to see a doctor or a specialist who speaks your language or is culturally competent, we know for the population of Latinos and Spanish-speaking folks, or any language, right, that there's just not enough culturally competent doctors. And so using the K through 12 space, making sure we're getting students, finishing school in STEM, going to medical school and getting them that support from point A to graduation and actually going and serving these communities. We're going to be taking on a multi-year effort that's going to have a lot of different levers. There's 11 initiatives to grow that. And so hopefully it's not going to be overnight, but at the end of the Trump administration or in the next 10 years when we have a brand new legislature, we'll also have a huge new crop of doctors to serve our community. So shout out to doctors.
And having a cultural competent doctor is so important. I'm sure you're enlisting the help of Fools in Medicina, yeah?
We've talked about it.
I love that.
I mean, I just want someone who can understand me, And have
That's
the
your
same,
demo.
Yeah, have the same size as me,
The higher the socks.
Yeah, the down to the fool and the doctor. And I think it's important. Like, I think a lot of folks are thinking about January 20th and what's going to happen with this new presidential administration, but the affirmative stuff that we're doing, is really important. The things that we're like, yes, we're going to protect, and we're also going to push. Like, there's no rainy cloud over me because our communities are resilient. Some of the things that immigrant advocates, when you say immigrant rights in California, when you're working on state legislation, it's education, it's consumer protections, it's everything. So, I think folks are really going to focus on trying to provide more bilingual educators with actual really good curriculum, that when there's like dual enrollment or dual immersion programs for students who are learning a language, an API language, because in Spanish there's a lot of support, but in Vietnamese and other languages there's not as much support there.
Yeah,
and so,
I wouldn't say that there is a lot of support in Spanish either.
True.
I think we can do a lot better as a state. The governor included money for teacher recruitment. But it's also how are we retaining those Spanish speakers? How are we retaining those other teachers that are making a difference? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's there isn't enough teachers as a whole, but representation matters.
Absolutely.
I think that's what we're trying to hone in on.
No, I think it's more so as how can we increase the amount of services that students deserve, that those communities want and need because they voted for them and they told their legislator to go to Sacramento and provide access to certain languages because that's what the community represents. And so I think that's important. In general, last year consumer advocates had an excellent year under Newsom. It's easier for you now to get out of the subscription that costs too much money because of legislation that he signed that was authored by Assemblymember Schiavo. And so I think folks are going to build off of that. People are going to try to provide more renter protections, especially with gouging going on, or potential gouging, and so forth. And, I think it's going to be a real nexus of how do we increase language access and protections in some of those spaces as well. So I think consumer advocates are just going to continue the momentum of what was so positive last year, but also because there's not going to be as much support from the federal side of things. So that's our.
We could tape a part 2 post January 20th.
Yeah. Oh no, we'll be coming back. But that. So I think that's it. Any closing words, thoughts that y'all want to share with folks who might be listening, whether they're an advocate or just a community member trying to understand what's going on in Sacramento?
Get involved. Like, that's I think the easiest thing. I think oftentimes that people may feel powerless or like throw their hands up in some cases, like, well, what am I gonna do? Like, your voice actually matters, right? You know, people's voices actually matters. They make a difference. You know, talking to members of the legislature, sometimes it feels like it's like pushing a rock up a hill, but you know, unlike that fable or whatever it is, like, you can get that rock over that hill many a times, and that's why California has been such a progressive state and a national leader on a number of issues, not just climate, right? So those voices matter.
Yeah. Definitely +1 to that. This conversation, first of all, this gave me energy. Thank you, because this week has been tough. So this is nice being here to chat with everybody. But I like second, third, and fourth that. I mean, I think about, I started at the beginning talking about Health for All. And how it took 10 years to finally get this full Medi-Cal expansion. And that was because of the hundreds and hundreds of people who showed up to rallies, who came and shared their story at the Capitol. And I think one thing that I feel, you should tell me if you all run into this too, when we bring community or when community comes into the Capitol, everybody's nervous. I get nervous. I don't like talking to legislators. Like, staff, I'm a little more comfortable, but they get nervous. And I see people trying to go over our stats and our data, because we'll give them the fact sheet, we talk about it, but they're like, I don't know this number. You don't need to know the number. You don't need to know what billion, what technical, whatever. You're your expert. Yeah, that's for us to know. You're your expert in your story, and everybody has a story. Your lived experience point you talked about, like, that's what your expertise is. We cannot tell your story the way you can tell your story. And I think to this point about, like, get involved, make sure you're sharing that story with the legislator, with their staff, with the governor if the opportunity presented itself, because you never know what nugget is gonna seep in, even if it takes 10 years. You are part of chipping away at that. And so I just want to anybody who's even thinking about it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, Rita. I think folks can really get involved at the state level, but I think folks could even get involved locally, whether that's serving on a commission, volunteering for a committee, a nonprofit, elevating your voice, your testimony, bringing people together. And I think people forget how much power there is in, making a difference locally. And I think something I'm really excited about this upcoming year is a bill that I've been working on with a whole coalition of folks on trying to expand transparency on gubernatorial appointments. And this year we're hoping to expand that to legislative appointments. So, the state legislature has the ability to also appoint people to other boards and commissions. And so, I think it's important to know who's on those boards, and it provides other advocates or people in communities to figure out maybe who's missing at the table. And so I'm really excited for that. And then I think it also plays a role into the importance of representation, right? It's important for us as Latinos to be in the Capitol advocating for policies that we relate to, our lived experience. And so, that's a bill I'm really excited about. But I think it also plays to how important it is to use our voices at every level of government.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been amazing to talk with you in this formal setting. I know we're all going to go get tacos afterwards or something because you're all my friends, but appreciate. No, you are. The healthy one is. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.